All right, so we're live. Okay,
We are.
yeah, absolutely. Hello and welcome. A very good evening to everyone joining in for this LinkedIn Live episode, wherein we will be talking about managing and influencing stakeholders. What an important topic, isn't it? And today we have none other than Bharti Dekate, who is the founder of We Are Ideas and a certified coach. And we'll be going deeper into understanding her journey so far. She's been working with so many people. So I think if someone observes people, I think Bharti has a lot of insights about that. And managing stakeholders, influencing stakeholders is all about people at the core, and we'll be going deeper there. Thank you so much, Bharti, for taking time out of your busy schedule and kind of talking about this very important topic with all of us. Very glad to have you here.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to all the people who join in and having a fruitful conversation about stakeholders today.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, Bharti, just to get things started, why don't you kind of tell us a bit about your journey? Um, how did you kind of land into this particular role of enabling people to become their better selves? And now you're a certified professional coach. So, talk us through your journey as it has happened over the years.
So it's been about 20 years since I've been in the corporate space, but I also learned fairly quickly that the corporate canvas was rather small for me. So I
Hmm.
started consulting, and a few years into consulting, I realized that I wanted to do something on my own. Now my team services 22 countries across the world, and
Wow.
thank you. And stakeholder management is a topic that keeps coming back up into
Hmm.
focus across geographies,
Yeah.
across industries.
Hmm.
So, very happy to be here to talk about it with you today, Arindam.
All right, amazing. So let's kind of start peeling the onion step by step here, right? You said it's a very important topic, keeps coming back again and again. Why do you think it is such an important topic to begin with, like managing stakeholders? Why do you think that's such an important topic that keeps coming up?
The coach in me wants to throw the question right back at you because that was one of the ways we got connected in the first place. Arindam,
Yeah.
we were talking about this back at one
Right.
of your stints.
Yeah.
My, so I would love to hear your response to it. My take on this, Arindam, is increasingly with matrixed organizations with complex roles
Yeah.
and the need to draw a line of alignment across multiple dependencies in an organization.
Yeah.
Stakeholder management is in nobody's job description, but it is such an important part of success in any role today.
Yeah.
That whether you're in fintech, whether you're in e-com and tech, whether you're in
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals, it's important.
Yeah. No,
What's
completely
your
relate
thought?
to it. And yeah, completely relate to it. Having spent my career mostly in product and in the technology space, wherein we're working across so many functions, right? Like from designers to engineers to analytics to marketing to business folks to even legal, accounting, so many different functions. And a lot of these functions, especially as you talked about in matrix organizations, are very cross-functional in nature, which means you're dealing with people with very different kinds of motivations, with the different kinds of interests, and to get everyone on the same page to move forward a project becomes kind of quite an arduous task in itself. Right? So, and that's what I've seen in my career as well. People who've been able to manage stakeholders, influence stakeholders, they possess a certain skill set, right? And that's why they can grow really fast, and they can. It seems like they walk into a room and they're able to align suddenly everyone, which many other people would struggle to do, right? And not just that, you are kind of also dealing with people across different hierarchy levels, right? Not just at your level, but maybe senior levels, sometimes even at the founder CEO levels, right? Which is what makes it even more challenging. So, yeah, absolutely agree with what you're saying. Uh, are you seeing this particular thing about challenge of managing stakeholders uh, coming across different levels though, like from all the way junior levels to senior levels, or do you see that mostly at a mid level or a senior level problem?
I'll answer it two ways, Arindam. One part of it is a function of what life cycle or stage your organization is. Earlier life stage, rather undefined roles, everybody ends up doing a lot of things. It's easier to get things done, but you're multiple hatting. And therefore, the tonality and the nature of stakeholder management is different. As compared to large organizations that were once a startup, are no longer startup, are now in steady state, their stakeholder management for middle managers, product managers, engineering managers across the board is about complexity, multiplicity, and dealing with VUCA in all of its forms.
Right.
So both ways, life cycle of the organization and the role that you're in, even within a large organization.
Yeah. And do you see this kind of, you talked about the fact that you see this across geographies. Is it the same problem statement across geographies, or in certain geographies, because of the cultural aspect, do you see certain different patterns?
The Dutch are very straightforward. And their issues with managing stakeholder is to tread a fine line of maintaining balance of emotions and relationship with the Asians. The Asians find it challenging to assert and say no. The Americans are very, very goal oriented, and they often tend to focus on the task and not so much on the person. So there are different flavors to it. And of course, there's the organization culture that you need to bear in mind. The interesting part, Arindam, is there are easy hacks and frameworks that come from deep research, not just in neuroscience, but also people science. And these hacks are right there waiting for us to be used and exploited for our own advantage so that we can be more efficient, reduce the interferences in our performance.
Okay. So since you mentioned hacks are out there for us to tap into, so let's talk a few more things about these hacks so that everyone listening in can actually implement some of these hacks, right? So let's first understand about stakeholders. Is there a way to identify what kind of a stakeholder, or how should I approach a particular stakeholder? Is there any hack around that?
Oh, yeah. Neuroscience tells us that stakeholders are either on your right side or not on your right side. And you can almost draw up a dashboard of how stakeholders relate to you and how you show up with stakeholders. Not just in times of conflict, but also in terms of how you influence or what stance a stakeholder has to your idea or proposal. So yes, there are very clear ways of identifying what kind of stakeholders you're dealing with.
Okay. Well, can you give us an example there of how should I actually go about identifying stakeholders? Yeah.
Sure. One of the easy identifiers is whether I'm dealing with a supportive stakeholder or a really aggressive and a difficult one. But if we were to go a little bit into neuroscience tells us that if you are not in alignment with an idea, you could be dealing with stakeholders who are resistors. And the way to deal with resistors is very different from how you deal with skeptics. Their needs are very different. They're looking for different things from you. Is very different from how do you deal with somebody who's waiting and watching and not signing up on your idea because they're wanting psychological safety or social safety. And how do you deal with them? Versus when a stakeholder is a co-creator or an experimenter.
Right.
So those are the 5 categories that come up for me. And this comes from the world of neuroscience.
So just to recap, you said there is a resistor, there's a supporter, there is a skeptic, there's a co-creator, and what's the fifth one?
There's a wait and watch.
There's a wait and watch. Okay, there, yes, definitely we've all encountered people who adopt that, like a wait and watch. So, okay, and for each of these different stakeholder types, is there a different strategy that we need to adopt? If so, how should we think about it?
Yeah, different strategies for each one of them. One of my favorite hacks is when you're dealing with a resistor,
Hmm.
you're kind of up against a wall. We all know that feeling
Yeah.
when you're driven up the wall, or you're almost talking to a wall or a rock.
Yeah.
And in that case, I'm not going to let out the secrets. I want people to join in and
Sure.
learn the science behind this in the
Sure.
session. But let's talk about dealing with resistors. Maybe you can escalate, or you can get somebody in to open the doors for you. When you're dealing with
Hmm.
a skeptic, for example, one of
Right.
my favorite hacks is to show them confirmatory evidence,
Hmm. Okay.
because the skeptic is kind of saying, I don't know whether this is going to work. The
Yeah.
sound of skeptic is saying, I'm not sure about this yet.
Hmm.
The sound of the skeptic is also saying, I want to see more evidence that what you're saying
Hmm.
has been tried, tested, and has worked for
Yeah.
somebody else before. And the hack
Right.
right there is
Yeah.
confirmatory evidence use
Hmm.
cases.
Right. Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And when we are thinking about applying these strategies, right, and because we are surrounded by stakeholders who will fall in each of these buckets, I guess, right? So, which is why perhaps managing stakeholders or influencing stakeholders becomes very hard, because it's like a switch that you have to turn on or off in terms of your strategy. Like in one room, for example, if there are stakeholders of different types sitting in, how should one approach that kind of a situation then? Because you have one resistor, one supporter, one skeptic, right? One co-creator perhaps, and one wait and watch. All the five different types of stakeholders are in the same room. Then how do you go about doing it?
That's a great question, Arindam. Clearly, it comes from your experience of having dealt with uh,
I've been
large.
in that situation for sure, right? And many, many times, and I'm not quite sure if I've mastered that technique yet, but I'm sure the audience can relate to this as well.
I'm sure, yeah, it brings back memories of war rooms with
Yeah,
20, sometimes 30,
yeah,
50
yeah,
stakeholders, everybody
yeah,
giving a counterpoint of view. It almost
right,
seems like you're on the
yeah,
line of fire.
right.
Uh, it's a great question because that's so real. It's The trick is in ensuring that you're not just able to read the room,
Hmm.
but you're also able to pull out the right strategy with different people when you're
Yeah,
talking to them. And that
yeah,
takes practice, which is
hmm.
why when you're learning these,
Yeah,
when you're learning these skills, you need safe spaces where you can practice this out with so many different
yeah,
people, because we all have our defaults.
yeah,
And moving beyond your default takes
yeah.
safe practice.
Hmm. No, absolutely. I think uh, one of the things which I have seen is, uh, since you talked about reading the room, especially if you have a co-creator and a supporter, one of the things which I usually try to do is make sure they are also speaking in the same voice along with me. So then it's three people speaking instead of just one person speaking, right? Which many a times I've seen help in kind of influencing the other three stakeholders who might be a resistor or a skeptic, right, or a wait and watch, right? So because if multiple people are speaking in the same voice, and typically before walking into those meetings, I would prep up the other two, who is a supporter and a co-creator, to make sure that we're all talking in that same voice, right? Which is then not just a voice of one, but kind of the other one. And the other thing which I've seen, Bharti, which I've tried out and sometimes it has worked, is not to debate on a tactic, but to kind of align on a principle. Because usually I've seen people are more open to challenging tactics, but they're more open to aligning on principles, right? Because at a principle level, then it's not like someone's agenda is on the table. It's like, okay, at a principle level, we are aligning, which will stand the test of time.
That's a great tip.
So,
It
all right. So let's kind of move forward with this. And stakeholder management is such a deep topic. I don't think we can ever complete any of these in such a short period of time. But you talked about goals as well in the middle of the conversation, and when it comes to aligning stakeholders on goals, especially given that each one might have a different motivation or a different interest, how can someone try to kind of align stakeholders on a goal? What's the process like?
That's interesting, because one answer might not really serve all purposes. Invariably, when I think invariably when we are servicing multiple goals, we are also servicing multiple motivations,
Yeah,
and it takes it takes skill and it takes understanding to not just understand the underlying motivations
yeah,
of a task, but also understand the motivations that humans are carrying. Because at the end of the day, people don't
mm,
get convinced because of logos,
right,
uh, logic. They get convinced because of emotions.
yeah,
And working with human motivation, uh, understanding how do you align different needs
yeah,
while you ride on those emotions is
yeah,
it takes mastery.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a very important piece that you talked about. How do you kind of really rally them around the right emotions? And which is why perhaps we talk about building relationships and not just making it very transactional in nature. Um, but when it comes to evoking emotions, like again, since you've been studying this from a neuroscience angle as well, are there certain emotions which we should definitely stay away from? And are there certain emotions which we should try to embrace while influencing stakeholders?
You're asking great questions, Arindam.
That's
um,
my job today.
Great question. We have a coach in the making, listeners. um, yeah, emotions. Um, I personally think that fear is a very powerful emotion.
Okay.
In earlier times in our life, in early years of our life, fear informs us of survival.
Hmm.
And then once we start getting into the workspace, fear also starts taking very different forms.
Hmm.
And if we continue to listen to the voice of fear,
Yeah.
it also means
Hmm.
that it eats into your confidence,
Hmm.
because fear comes with shadows.
Okay.
And those shadows can be saboteurs, and the saboteurs can take the form of the voice of a judge, the voice
Hmm.
of I'm not good enough, am I
Hmm.
even thinking right?
Right.
So even when I'm coaching or working with clients, or even when we are role playing, it's important to listen to the voice of fear and manage it.
Hmm.
It's good and it's not so good. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there is the emotion of, to me, this is personally important, happiness.
Sure.
We, we are, we as human beings are built for survival.
Mm-hmm.
We are not necessarily built for happiness.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
happiness is a choice that we make when
Yeah.
we are pursuing purpose at our roles, when we are
Hmm.
pursuing a project, when we choose to show up at work. And to me, fear and happiness both together inform a lot about what we should or should not be doing beyond our role and organizational boundaries. It almost veers towards philosophy,
Yeah.
but with that risk, I
Right.
thought to put it out there anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. No, absolutely. And if I am I'm trying to kind of tie it back to what we were talking about earlier about the different stakeholder types, the resistor and the co-creator and others. Are there certain emotions to evoke for different stakeholder types?
Say a bit more about your question. I'm not sure I understand it.
So, like, would the emotion of fear work better with a certain stakeholder type versus the emotion of happiness working better with a certain stakeholder type? Excuse me.
Most of the times, if we can manage our own fear, I think that is a
Hmm.
big service to ourselves.
Okay. So you're talking from our own perspective, that those emotions. Okay.
Yeah. And also, we end up dealing with the fears of others sometimes
Hmm.
and recognizing that you might not be able to solve for it, but
Hmm.
recognizing that this is the voice of fear that I'm confronting, and therefore a stakeholder does not want to make a mistake and sign up
Hmm.
for a certain idea because they're
Got it.
just very afraid that it might go south and they are risk
Hmm.
averse with this idea.
Hmm.
What does that trigger in me, and how am I responding to that?
Hmm.
Is itself a significant task for us to manage. In
Okay.
terms of engaging with stakeholders, um, engaging with the voice of possibility
Hmm.
is a powerful one.
Okay. Tell us a bit more about what you mean by the voice of possibility.
Since you talked about co creators and experimenters, building trust and leveraging trust to push the boundaries of what is possible with your co creators or
Hmm.
experimenters is what startups are made of.
Hmm.
And being
Right.
able to deliver that with a co founder or being able
Right.
to deliver that with somebody who says, Chal, try karke dekhte hain,
Hmm. Yeah.
is powerful.
Hmm. Got it. Very interesting. Very interesting. And one other thing which I've been thinking about is I've worked with so many different people, and there are certainly a set of those who do a fantastic job at managing and influencing stakeholders, and there are some others who do the worst possible job in managing and influencing stakeholders. There's such a vast difference. What all are the aspects that contribute to that, and how important is someone's personality type towards kind of managing stakeholders there?
Super important.
Hmm.
How I engage with my stakeholders in times of conflict
Hmm.
is a function of my personality.
Hmm.
Am I dealing with conflict like a shark? Am I
Hmm.
dealing with conflict like a wise owl? Am I
Yeah.
dealing with conflict like an opportunistic fox?
Right.
All of that is a function of what is my default style of
Hmm.
interpersonally showing up in times of
Yeah.
conflict.
Hmm.
Similarly, when I'm influencing stakeholders, am I inspiring? Am
Hmm.
I naturally authoritative? And so I
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah.
Or am I naturally somebody who puts an arm around other people and says,
Yeah.
let's do it together?
Hmm.
All of those
Hmm.
are all of those are styles that emanate from partly our personality and partly what has worked for us in the past.
Right.
And sometimes even in response to the selection bias in cultures.
Yeah.
Being able to notice that, being able to work through it. For example, when I'm working with a dreamer or somebody who inspires,
Hmm.
it's useful to know that because they operate at 30,000 feet,
Yeah.
They need somebody on their team who can operate at 1 inch on the ground.
Mm.
They need the
Right.
sense of realism.
Right.
And irrespective of whether I'm also a dreamer and I signed up for an inspiring story and the possibility of a dream, knowing that my stakeholder needs that balance
Mm.
is guarantee for forging a long-term relationship with that stakeholder.
Right. Right. Very interesting. So it seems like the very first step is self-awareness, right? Because the more you know about yourself, your own personality type, the better you would be in crafting out strategies to influence the stakeholders that you work with, which is kind of moving more in the EQ space. And we all know it's kind of in that space. But um, when we talk about like the different strategies for different people based on their own personality type, how can you give an example of how someone who is perhaps more of an introvert, or someone who's more of an extrovert, or someone who's thinking like a shark versus someone who's thinking like a fox will actually have very different strategies while managing and influencing stakeholders? Can you just highlight that with an example? You were on mute, I guess. Bharti, yes. Yeah.
Sure. So I am thinking of a shark
Mm-hmm.
who, I'm sorry about that disturbance.
No,
I'm
that's
thinking
okay.
of a
Yeah.
shark who is very difficult, who in a stakeholder who stands up to you, goes
Yeah.
full on ballistic when things
Right.
don't work their way.
Yeah.
If I'm somebody
Mm.
who is a koala, I am
Mm.
stepping back and
Mm.
I'm saying, oh my God, I'm
Yeah.
not going to be able to
Yeah.
deal with this heat right now.
Right. Yeah.
The key
Mm.
is doing that for 5 seconds and
Mm.
then coming back with
Mm.
hacks that work with a shark.
Mm.
For
Got it.
example, sharks are all about boundaries. In that
Mm.
moment,
Mm.
how can you look them in the eye and
Yeah.
establish a boundary which says, for example, let's talk about this in 5 minutes' time, or
Mm.
let's talk about this when we have 5 solutions to evaluate.
Right.
This not just contributes to the maturity with which you show up, but it
Yeah.
also saves everyone a lot of energy. And
Yeah.
when you engage in a conversation like this, it automatically elevates your respect in
Yeah.
the organization. You're seen as
Yeah.
somebody who knows what you're doing, not just
Yeah.
as a subject matter expert, but
Yeah.
also as a seasoned professional.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I can personally relate to that as well, because in the past, I have been in situations wherein I've walked away from a conflict because I thought, okay, it's best to remain silent here, uh, which my stakeholders saw as a lack of maturity, right? That you should be able to handle a hard situation, a conflicting situation. So you need to speak your mind there without rubbing off in the wrong way with the stakeholders. And perhaps I got that wrong, definitely. And that was a very big learning for me, that it's not just about speaking up only when the things are kind of in very good waters, but even in conflicting situations, can you navigate and not be silent suddenly, right? So I think that's a very important thing that he talked about. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about these situations, like conflicting situations, we're talking about difficult conversations, right? We're as humans, many a times we it's a fight versus flight response. Uh, Again, going into the neurosciences part of it, but we are internally wired up in a certain way. So how can someone overcome the way they are wired up to get outside of their comfort zone and be able to handle those difficult conversations?
Interesting question. Because I think at some level we all grapple with this. when we sit back and
Right.
reflect on weekends
Yeah.
or when we've had a really
Yeah.
bad meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I personally feel, Arindam, that self awareness is the most important and the most expensive
Yeah.
currency today in the corporate
Yeah.
world.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, self awareness, I think that makes all the difference
Hmm.
to how you choose to show up, what you choose to say, and what you choose not to say.
Right.
Um, and don't take me wrong, I'm not saying it's going to happen like that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's a constant choice,
Yeah.
and you can almost figure out there walks a self-aware leader, and
Yeah.
there walks one who is not yet there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. And thinking about ourselves as a work in progress, that mindset always takes you kind of forward a long way versus kind of not having that growth mindset at all. Right. So, yeah, absolutely. We can relate to that as well. And we've all seen folks in organizations also who are not so self-aware. Then that brings me to the next question. Uh, if we are saying being self-aware is so very important in the process of managing stakeholders, how can one become self-aware? Right? How can someone understand how they are wired up and then from that move forward with the right strategies to manage and influence stakeholders?
We live in an age, Arindam, where there is so much research which is already done to bring awareness
Mm,
to leaders who already lead very busy lives.
mm,
There are tools that help you figure what your style is. There
yeah,
are frameworks that you can access fairly quickly to
yeah,
map or read the room and
yeah,
then adopt the right strategy.
yeah,
So, one part of it is in internal,
yeah,
intrapersonal awareness about who I
yeah,
am and what is it that I am about and what's my
yeah,
default style, what's my preference, what am I good
mm,
at.
mm,
And then there is when you start pushing the envelope to outside of you and you start
mm,
saying, I understand myself. Let me
mm,
also understand the five other voices in this room, the 10 other
right,
people in my team, and let me start dealing with them differently. That's when you
mm,
move from your default
yeah,
into more intentional, varied
mm,
choices. And that
right,
also means there is a lot which is available for you to draw from, and it calls for intentional astute practice where you're literally drawing quivers, arrows from your quiver,
mm,
and you're
mm,
saying this is the right one to use
yeah,
in this situation with somebody
yeah,
else.
mm,
And to me, it's a lot of fun. It's a
yeah,
lot of fun to do this trial and error. It's
yeah,
almost like
yeah,
I'm a board gamer. I love to play different games.
yeah,
And when we're playing board games, especially the strategy games, it's very interesting to sometimes play an off move just to see
mm,
what do you get out of it,
yeah,
and build that muscle and do it more
yeah,
often so that you're moving
yeah,
away from your default play
yeah,
into something that is different. So you're
yeah,
almost in this state of experimentation, not just learning about
yeah,
yourself, learning about others, and then experimenting with different sorts of behavior so that you're
yeah,
widening your repertoire of
yeah,
how you're engaging with the external world.
yeah. No, I think again, a very important point which most people miss, I guess, is repeating the same mistake over and over again with the same stakeholder, right? Which is why iterating on your strategy, and sometimes it may not work, and which is why it's important to correct it and move with something else and try it out. And that's very very important, and which kind of I find a lot of people can benefit from if they are continuously experimenting and trying it out, trying out different strategies and see what works, right? And I've had that personal experience as well, Bharti, like a colleague in my previous workplace who I used to have very tough times kind of really getting into conversations, but I ended up becoming kind of perhaps the best business partner that I've worked with, right? By kind of really changing the style and really understanding that person over time. And that really worked out very, very well. It's all about understanding the other person as well. And that mindset switch often kind of helps. So, so great. So I think we've talked about a lot of deep topics. You've talked about neurosciences. You've talked about frameworks. You've talked about different types of stakeholders. Um, let's talk a bit about uh, how someone can learn about these things, which brings me to the fellowship that you are running on NextLeap around managing and influencing stakeholders. Tell us a bit more about what that fellowship experience is going to look like. I know it's going to be very hands-on, and having kind of worked with you in the past, I know you like to put people in the middle of the situation and do it. But tell us a bit more about what the learners can expect from that.
So the fellowship is designed for practice in the real world. The
Right.
fellowship is all about influencing, dialing up your conversations, being able to engage with your stakeholders, moving away from your default and flexing your style.
Yeah.
And all of this through a lot of hands on experience. The idea
Right.
is to create safe spaces where leaders and managers can learn from each other. The frameworks are, by the way, they
Yeah.
barely occupy much airtime during the session. It's really the learning that you get from each other. So
Yeah.
it's about uh, dealing with the different variables and how different people attack the same problem. So expect
Yeah.
challenges, expect role plays,
Yeah.
activities,
Yeah.
job aids, all of these to ensure that there is not a dull moment and a lot of learning from
Yeah.
each other.
Absolutely. And whenever you are teaching someone, I don't think there can ever be a dull moment having kind of seen you there. And yeah, for those of you who are listening in, do check out this fellowship, which is coming up in the month of September. We're just starting off in the first week of September. It's a 4-week fellowship on managing and influencing stakeholders, being led by Bharti. And as Bharti mentioned, it's going to be a very immersive learning experience, very hands on, very social. The Next Leap experience on steroids, I would say, with a lot of role plays and with a lot of peer discussions, a lot of different perspectives, which makes for a very, very interesting learning session. So, having seen you kind of go through the designing of the fellowship, I know it's going to be a wonderful learning experience for people who join in. So let's kind of also understand your experiences dealing with different stakeholders, Bharti, uh, and what have been your learnings around managing stakeholders. And you've dealt with so many of them, right, in different capacities also. So talk us through some of the learnings that you have had, or certain learnings that have been reinforced uh, in terms of managing and influencing stakeholders.
So I used to be this complete idealist who would have academic and theoretical solutions
Hmm.
to most problems in the corporate world. Pretty
Yeah.
much in the first few years in my corporate roles and then consulting roles, I figured that all of that has a different space, uh, perhaps on bookshelves, and that is
Yeah.
also important
Yeah.
because that's where wisdom gets churned and documented. And my personal learning has been to engage with stakeholders and be super realistic and practical about what needs to
Yeah.
happen without needing to veer away from the right thing to do.
Hmm.
And that's a personal practice to stay on the right path and
Yeah.
offer the right advice
Yeah.
without veering away from the practical and the real.
Got it. Got it. No, I think that that's very well said. And folks who are listening in, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat and or in the comment section, and we'll take those questions as they come in. Um, Another thing which we wanted to talk about, Bharti, is when we talk about influencing, invariably what comes in is your communicating style, right? When you're influencing stakeholders, you're talking about communication at the core. Um, how can someone practice communicating with influence? Like, what are other things that you would talk about in terms of how someone can practice communicating with influence?
Uh, this is a very interesting question because communication is such an abused word in the space of
Yeah,
feedback and appraisals
yeah,
that it's almost like a silver bullet for anything that you can't specify.
right.
And so many times we get a brief that my team deals with a brief that we need to work on communication of leaders
Yeah,
or managers. And while everything is about communication and conversation, because most of our work happens through
yeah,
communication and conversation,
yeah,
Arindam, there are so many different shapes that it takes.
yeah,
Communicating with impact when you are pitching an idea to a senior stakeholder who's going to either support you or not support you, saying it in 2 minutes,
hmm,
and then translating the same idea into executionable steps that are well understood over 30 minutes.
yeah,
Today, that scale is so important that if you're not able to go with the same idea from zero to full idea in 2 minutes and then from zero to 30 minutes of detailing,
yeah,
you have a slim chance of being
yeah,
successful.
yeah,
And this is one problem statement that comes across levels.
right.
Leaders who are at vice president level are often given the feedback on their
Hmm,
communication,
hmm,
saying you have it in your head, but
yeah,
you have to translate your complex idea into doable small steps.
yeah,
And it's true for coders who are sitting there doing very valuable tasks
yeah,
to saying, you have a great suggestion. Can
yeah,
you articulate it in a fashion that will help leaders see how it will make a
yeah,
difference to the user experience? I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's the range of communication.
yeah,
Abused as it is,
yeah,
we humans constantly learn about communication. We're
yeah,
constantly discovering how we
yeah.
can better communicate with each other.
No, absolutely. I think such a wonderful point that you put across, like the zooming in and the zooming out, both forms. Whenever you need that, it's such a skill, such an important skill to have in today's world because you are dealing with different types of stakeholders, like folks who are reporting into you versus folks who you are reporting into, or your skip levels, and your communication style has to be very different, keeping in mind what their interests are. Very very important point that you raised, and I think that's where most people struggle because they will adopt the same style for different audiences, and which is where all the questions and all their challenges come in. Very nice. um, as we kind
Arindam,
of
I have a
yeah,
question for you.
yeah, sure, yes, please go for it.
You have to talk about why managing stakeholders. I know it's been a topic that we
Yeah,
have discussed for a long time. We have worked
yeah,
on it together, and this is
yeah,
something that you used to teach your team members. You had some frameworks. You used to teach the
yeah,
Mendelow's matrix
yeah,
in
yeah,
onboarding and induction,
yeah,
and people
yeah,
people still remember you for
yeah,
that. So
yeah.
tell me, what is your take or philosophy of managing stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the first thing what I've noticed is as kind of organizations grow, the complexity of running business operations also grows. right? And with the complexity of business operations growing, it invariably translates into more people that you are interacting with, right? It will never be the case that the organization has grown 100x, but the number of people has not grown by kind of 1x or 2x. It would always have grown, right? And the challenge in today's world that I've seen is um, people uh, like it's hard to read people many a times because you are primarily engaging in a very transactional manner, work related pieces, uh, and it's very hard to read people why they're saying something what they're saying, and which leads to interpreting in the wrong way many a times, which leads to certain perceptions forming in our minds, right? And we carry that baggage along with us, and that in turn impacts how we keep interacting with those stakeholders. And which is where it's very important to take a step back and understand, how am I wired? How are these people thinking about the problem, the different perspectives, right? What each one's interests or motivations are. Can someone derail me in my kind of project as well, that I need to be wary of, and accordingly adopt different strategies. And since I've been in the product world, the sheer number of people that you work with in any given problem statement that you're working on is a lot, right? Like before next sleep, when I was working at Flipkart, I don't think there was one any function that I've not worked with, right? So it was such a complex setup, um, and which is why I feel like it's very important, as you are growing in your career, these softer skills matter so much, because at the end of the day, we talk about feedback, right? And the feedback that flows in maybe at the end of 6 months, at the end of 12 months, is just whatever someone remembers from their interactions, right? So which is why those interactions become so very important. If you're not paying attention to that, um, it'll bite you in the wrong way going forward. And I have myself made so many mistakes, which is why I want people to kind of keep learning. And the other thing is, like, the reason why I focus on it so much is nobody teaches you this, right? Like, no business school is going to teach you this, right? And the very few online learning programs also where you get to be taught, right? You're taught this particular thing, and which is why I have personally always felt this need. So in the past, I've taught people, as you're saying, and now we have even better kind of you teaching people. So yeah, so that's what brings it. And even in the Next Leap community, we usually keep asking our learners what all other things that they would want to learn next. And managing and influencing stakeholders has always been at the top, right? And which is why we said, like, okay, like that's a need in today's market. People need to learn this. People want to learn this. So, and we are best positioned to do it with instructors like you coming on board. So I'm really excited about this fellowship that you'll be running. And I'm looking forward to the learners going through an amazing learning experience.
Yes, this is. I'm very excited to be able to hone the software
Yeah,
of all these fantastic leaders who already have great hardware in terms of their technical skills, and then their in
yeah,
terms of you know critical skills that are
yeah,
so sought after. And
yeah.
this little software can make all the difference to how your user interfaces, how your
Absolutely.
manager interfaces.
Absolutely. Very nicely put. So we have a question from Manju Yadav, Bharti. Uh, and her question is, how do we understand people when we are dealing with them digitally? And I'm guessing she's referring to the remote workplace that we are in. We never meet them. So how can we understand people in a remote working environment?
Hey Manju, nice to meet you. And thank you so much for this question, because hybrid work is such a reality right now. Um, When we do not have the benefit of video on and we're only going by auditory cues, Manju, it's about having rituals that will help you build rapport. For example, um, one tip that I follow is the first 5 minutes of any conversation, we try to keep it about not work,
Mm.
engage with the person. That takes me to my second tip, which is once you've engaged with a person, even when you're not seeing them, it kind of gives you a little bit of a temperature or emotional baseline. It gives you an auditory baseline on when a person is excited, does their pitch go up? When they're not okay about an idea, do they sound differently? Thirdly, when you do not see people in hybrid work or you've not met them before, digital engagements, using the power of pauses, asking clarifying questions, keeping your sentences short, 5 to 7 words, all of them go a long way. Hopefully, some of these tips uh, will come into your use and hopefully you find them practical and useful.
Fantastic. No, thanks for sharing that, Bharti. Very, very relevant in today's world as well. And that brings us to the close of today's session, Bharti. It's been wonderful chatting with you about how to manage stakeholders, how to think about managing stakeholders and influencing stakeholders. And we are so very excited to be partnering with you at Next Sleep around this particular topic, the 4 week fellowship around managing stakeholders, which starts in September. So looking forward to that. Oh, we have one more question. Maybe we can just take
Yeah,
that before we wrap it up.
sure.
Deepam Paul, and Deepam is also part of the Next Leap community, so he's been a learner. And his question is, how do we push stakeholders to complete something without creating the impression of pushing them or micromanaging them?
I would love to answer this. I also want to see if Arindam, you have an answer to this. This is a very interesting one.
Very, very interesting one as well. I don't know. Let me just think about it. How to push stakeholders to complete something without creating the impression of pushing them or micromanaging them. I'm guessing what Deepam is referring to maybe is when working with designers or engineers, where uh, you're expecting them to complete the work or complete the project on time. Um, and you're not trying to be meddling in and asking a lot of questions there. What I have found is your battle is half won if you invest 80% of your effort in the first 20% of the journey, right? Which means like you're really focused initially when starting off on that project to ensure that these people really understand the why and understand their role in this, which drives up their commitment levels versus making it very transactional, right? So that's kind of one of the things which I have kind of tried out multiple times and it's worked out for me. But I would love to hear from you also, Bharti, what your take is.
It's a great point. Working on a Pareto is a great tip, a very handy one. I often get this question, and thank you, Deepam, for putting this in. Um, if you have a micromanaging style, then you need to worry. For example, if you are a perfectionist, if you are pessimistic about outcomes, and you do not trust others, usually these three traits coming together lead to micromanagement. But let me also tell you, my friend, if you do not have these traits in you, perhaps you need not worry about being a micromanager. There are so many of my coaches who come up with a fear of being a micromanager because they've given that feedback to somebody else and they do not want to receive that feedback. It's super important for you to know if you fall in that category. And if you do not fall in that category, rest assured, your review mechanisms should take care. Providing specific feedback is not micromanaging. Knowing what you want to be done is not micromanaging. Meddling in the affairs of others and breathing down their neck is micromanaging. So, first figure out if you are prone to this style, then worry. If you're not prone to this style, chill.
Well, chill, I don't think anyone can, right? When they are trying to work with so many different stakeholders and tough stakeholders at that. But yeah, I think that brings us to the close, I guess, Bharti. Thank you everyone for listening in, for joining in on Tuesday evening. I hope all of you also learned a lot from Bharti's gems that she's been dropping throughout this session. Thank you once again, Bharti, for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this, and really, really looking forward to the 4-week fellowship on managing and influencing stakeholders that is starting off on next sleep starting in September. So that brings us to the close. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night. And look forward to seeing you for the next LinkedIn series event very soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you for having me. It was great fun.
Thanks,
Hope
Bharti.
to see you guys soon.